Good morning from the News Center. I'm Jan Charlton, sitting in for Lloyd Patterson. This is Daybreak.
In the 1980s,
Jan Charlton is at the center right now. Jan?
We would be inside.
Jan Charlton was a promising television reporter.
When he was born, this was Poland. In a few years' time, it was Germany.
She went on to work for CNN, ABC,
The nobles say they don't want revenge, just recognition.
even CBS Sunday Morning.
Truth about this country's past.
She was lively, daring, one of those people who celebrates life.
Wrong one. Here, give me that back.
No!
Oh, that's okay. You can keep it. Okay.
But at only 40 years old, the subtle changes began, the lapses in memory. 5 years ago, when she was 55, she received a diagnosis both awful and heartbreaking. Jan had Alzheimer's disease.
Let's go have a seat. Yes, you look, yeah, I'd say. I like people.
It has moved so fast that she is now in an assisted living facility where this once bright, articulate woman struggles to make sense.
How do you feel about being here? Well, mostly, I like people.
It can be painful to watch.
If they said something first thing in the morning, first lane, yes, coffee, yes. Oh, and that's good.
Judy Pring oversees the unit where Jan lives.
And I will go to get her for lunch, and she will be talking quite animatedly sometimes, and she's talking in the mirror. She's very concerned about whether or not the person in the mirror is going to come with us to lunch. She'll always say, "What about her?" And I'll say, "No, Jan, just you and I, we're going to go sit and have lunch together."
All right.
And she'll say, "Oh, okay." And she'll always make sure she says goodbye to the person in the mirror.
For me, this is not just another piece of journalism. As I'll explain in a moment, it's personal. But to understand Jan's tragedy, you must understand what happens when Alzheimer's strikes one so young.
Alzheimer's disease is a condition that affects the whole way someone is. It affects their personality, it affects their behavior, it affects their thinking, it affects their memory, it affects their ability to speak.
Dr. James Galvin is professor of neurology and psychiatry at New York University's Langone Medical Center. He says most Alzheimer's patients are in their 70s and 80s, but it can also strike as young as 30 when it is called early or younger onset.
There are about 250,000 Americans who have the disease before age 65.
The first thing to know about Alzheimer's is that there is no cure. The second, there is no known cause. And even worse, says Beth Kallmeyer, a senior director at the Alzheimer's Association.
There's no evidence that shows that you can prevent Alzheimer's disease.
Like you can't do a million crossword puzzles and that'll
Right now, what the research is showing us is that you cannot stop it by doing certain things.
And as baby boomers age, the problem will get far worse. Right now, some 5 million people have it. By mid-century, that number is expected to triple.
For lunch afterwards, the tour will be about 10 to 11:30.
That reality haunts Pat Van Dyke on an outing to the Dallas Museum of Art. For people with Alzheimer's disease, she seems out of place, too young for an illness usually associated with old age. Her early onset was diagnosed 6 years ago at age 52.
I mean, every day I know, my time's getting shorter, and I just need to do everything I can while I can and enjoy it, enjoy life.
For Pat, the hardest part may be ahead, when the ravages of the disease will likely force her into a long-term care facility. And she says that she will not want visits from the granddaughters she so cherishes.
Because I don't want them to see me like that.
And why would you want them to not see you at some point? What is it you want to avoid here?
I want to avoid the later stages and
them seeing you.
Them seeing me, not knowing them, not recognizing them. I don't want them to see that I don't know who they are. I mean, that's very hard for somebody.
I just like people as
as normal people.
The future for Pat may look a lot like the present for Jan Charlton.
Darling.
As I mentioned earlier, for me, Jan's story is both personal and painful. A story this reporter never expected to tell.
Somebody I love.
Jan Charlton Petersen is my wife. Jan loved me without measure. She was all I wanted in this life. It was a love affair that had a beginning but was never supposed to end. That is what this horror of a disease stole and destroyed. Jan and I were married in 1985. CBS posted us to Tokyo and Moscow, on to London and back to Asia. One of the things I loved most about her was how she embraced each new city as a new adventure.
And I want to see him all the time because I never see him.
She did all that with a man who is now a fading memory, who lives for her in the third person.
And then sometimes when I get too teary, because I do love him, and I just couldn't do without him.
And no matter how often it happens, nothing and no one can soften the agony when she has no idea that the man sitting with her, holding her as tightly as I can, is that same Barry. What's his name?
Mr. Happy.
That's his name.
Yes.
When Jan was first diagnosed, I took care of her myself. As she got worse, I hired a live-in caregiver. And finally, when her anger and confusion were slipping out of control, I had to put her into an assisted living facility, where on each painful visit, I see the changes as she disappears a little more. A friend calls it grieving, like saying goodbye by going to the same funeral over and over again.
Because it's such a long process and a long road that a family travels down together. It changes family dynamics, and it takes away all our preconceived notions about how families should look and how they should function.
I think I'm going to be in his life.
And Jan will always be in my life. But life continues. I learned from Jan early on to treat each day as beyond value, which presented me with one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make when I met Mary Nell.
The reality is I am a widow. The reality is that he is married to a woman that doesn't remember him. And so we exist in our own universe of this very peculiar new American family.
Mary Nell lost her husband of 22 years in an accident. We now live together. And before you judge us harshly,
this truly is a case of having to walk in someone's shoes before you make a judgment about how you would react and respond in similar circumstances.
Hi, how are you? Somebody else to tickle.
Together, we visit Jan, and together we watch over her. Mary Nell understood from the beginning that ours is a relationship of three, because it will always include Jan, the woman Mary Nell now calls her friend.
Well, when you meet Jan, you can't not love her. She is vivacious and open and warm, and if I loved Barry, I couldn't not love Jan.
And I vowed that Jan's life would not be lost in the wasteland of Alzheimer's, so I've written Jan's story. It is also a forewarning, because millions more may soon be on my same sad journey as Alzheimer's triples by mid-century. And this is your room. The Jan I knew is all but gone to me now, but I remember what she always taught me, to embrace life. And to do that, I must go on.